We're going to be talking about intervals, but first thing I wanted to do is just let you know I'm still looking for someone to sing the national anthem at the baseball game on Thursday. I've got soccer covered this week, but still looking for someone to sing at the baseball game Thursday. If you've already sung at games before and you just want to take it, great, let me know. If you're interested in potentially singing at one and you haven't done that before, let me know. We just have to sing it for me a couple of times to make sure that we're ready to go, and then I can sign you up to do that. So Thursday, looking for somebody for Thursday. Then the other thing is that Mrs. Erickson is coming to work on solo ensemble stuff for the people she's playing for tomorrow from 1:30 to 2:45. We've got somebody coming in from like 1:30 to 1:45-ish, maybe 1:50. So, Katie, I know she's playing for you. Would you be available about like 1:50, or could you be available?
I could maybe get out of the class.
Okay, because yeah, she's got today or tomorrow and then Friday again. So at some point you need to work with her a little bit. So maybe see if that would work. And then Allie, are you going to do Watermill?
Yeah.
Okay, so same thing. Do you have any time tomorrow?
Uh,
Are you here at 2:15, the beginning of choir?
yeah.
Okay, let's plan for the beginning of choir then for you, if that works. If Katie can get the one time before that, right before choir. Okay, so we'll plan for that. And try to get as many people through with her tomorrow as possible. All right, so here's what we're doing today. We're going to work on being able to read intervals and what that means, and the different steps that we have to take to get there. And if you're doing the basic version, you're just going to worry about whole steps and half steps and then the number part of the interval, which we'll talk about here in a second. If you go to the advanced version, then we're going to talk about specifically what type. You have a little green handout that you're going to use to do this. There's two sides to it. Today, the side that you need is the side with the keyboard. The other side is like ear training side, which we'll work on in choir a little bit coming up, but yeah, you need the side with the keyboard today. So, here we go, intervals. When we're talking about intervals, we're talking about the distance between two notes and how we label that, okay? If we want to be very specific in the kind of interval, we need to be able to count half steps, so we're going to review that really quickly. And the difference between half steps and whole steps, because that's a type of interval, right? It's the distance between notes. So here we go. The easiest way to see a half step and a whole step is to look or visualize a keyboard. Look at it or visualize a keyboard. Okay, a half step, something that's a half step away, remember, is the one that's right next to that other note. Okay, a whole step away has one key in between, or it's the same as two half steps. So if we look at that keyboard again, here's an example of a half step. B to C, there are no keys in between. Okay, another half step, F to F sharp. They are right next to one another, no keys in between. If I went F to G, that's a whole step. There's a key in between. Same thing between A and B, that's a whole step. There's a key in between. So right next to it, half step. One key away, or sorry, two keys away if you're counting it that way. So 1, 2, that's a whole step. Same thing as two half steps, which makes sense because two halves make a whole, right? Okay, so any questions on that part? And let's review. Cool, let's move to the next step then. So when we're talking about other kinds of intervals, things that are more than a step away, the first step that we're going to take in being able to identify what kind of interval that is, identify the distance, is to count the lines and spaces between the notes. I'm going to tell you something super important, so if you don't listen to anything else I tell you today, there's two things that you need to remember. This is one. When you're counting lines and spaces, when you're trying to determine the number part of the interval, you're going to include the line or space that the notes are on. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time, because the next step, I don't want you to get confused. They're not the same thing. When you are counting lines and spaces to determine the number part of the interval, you include the line or space that those notes are on. So if we do that together, here we're going to count this line as 1, this space is 2, this line is 3, that space is 4, that line is 5. This is a fifth of some kind. Okay, so that's the number part of the interval. It's actually the second half. But I want you to determine the number part first. I will tell you why in a few minutes. Okay, so that's step 1. If you are going to do the basic version of the bell work this week, that's what you need to know how to do for that. However, moving forward, talking about chords and types of chords and talking about scales, you'll need to know how to do what we're about to do for intervals here. So still stick with us. Okay, so again, We said we're gonna count those lines and spaces to come up with the number part of the interval. Now we need to figure out the first part, the quality, okay? And there are a couple different kinds that you can have. You can have perfect, major, minor, augmented, or diminished. So 5 different quality types. There are some rules to those that we'll go over in a second, but that's what you're trying to come up with is the first part of the interval, okay? We're gonna determine what kind it is. So we've got some kind of fifth. Let's go on to the second step to find out what kind, okay? So step 2 is to use that keyboard and count half steps. And then we're gonna use the chart that you have to determine what kind it is, okay? So here's why I wanted you not to get confused. When you're counting half steps, you are not going to include the first key that you start on, the first note. I'll show you that in a second, and I think it'll make more sense. But when you count half steps, do not include the first note. Okay? Lines and spaces, include both of them. When you're doing half steps, don't count the first key. I'll show you that here in just a second. Okay? And then we're going to use the chart. So we know we had some kind of fifth. Here's our interval again. We're going to find those 2 notes on the keyboard. Here's C. Here's G. Now we need to count the half steps in between to determine the quality. Remember, I'm not going to count C. That's my starting note. I'm trying to count how many half steps away we are. So if I counted this twice, that's not a half step away, it's the same note, right? So that's why I don't include the first one here. So here it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 half steps away. I'll show you that one more time. I'm not going to count my first key that I'm starting on. This is my first half step away. That's 1, 2 half steps, 3 half steps, 4 half steps, 5 half steps, 6 half steps. That's hard to say fast. 7 half steps gets us to G. Okay? We then go to our handy dandy little chart here. Find 7 half steps. We know that is a perfect fifth. All right? The reason we want to come up with the number part of the interval first, that may seem kind of backwards, why don't I just count half steps? Because if we count half steps, notice sometimes there are more than one name, there's more than one name for that number of half step. And it's going to depend on what it looks like on the page. That'll determine which version of it we say. So that's why you have to come up with the number part first. Because if I didn't come up with the number part first, and I just counted half steps, and I wrote an augmented fourth, but it was actually written as a fifth, that would be wrong. They sound the same. Here's a perfect fourth. Here's an augmented fourth. Here's a diminished fifth. And here's a perfect fifth. Okay? So augmented fourth, diminished fifth sound the same, but look different on the page. And we want to identify it accurately. Okay? So that's why you come up with the number part first, then figure out the quality. Make sense? Okay. So we're going to do a couple here together. I will point out one thing really quickly. When you have an interval that's typically perfect, okay? So fourth, fifth, or octave, we call those perfect. If they're not perfect, they're either going to be diminished or augmented, okay? A fourth, fifth, or octave will never be major or minor. They can only be perfect, augmented, or diminished. Seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths can be major or minor, but they will never be perfect, augmented, or diminished. If you kind of look at that chart, you can see which ones are which, okay? So just make sure you're referencing that chart so you get the right answer. Okay, so let's have someone come on down and draw an interval on the board, as long as it's less than an octave. Anything less than an octave, who wants to draw on the board today? Nobody. All right, Katie, come on down. Draw me an interval anywhere on the step, so long as it is not more than an octave.
Oh my god.
Okay, that's okay. I'm going to just make it slightly more difficult by doing that.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, first step is what? Counting spaces and lines. Do I include the notes on this one? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to include this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. That's step 1. Step 2. So we know it's some kind of fifth again. Now we're going to count half steps. What's my first note that I'm going to find on my keyboard? F. Okay, so find F on the keyboard. Then I'm going to find C flat on my keyboard. What's another name for C flat? B natural, good. Remember we have to know our enharmonics here. So find F and C flat, which is also the same thing as B, and then count half steps. Remember, don't count the first key. How many half steps did you come up with? 6, good, okay. Go to your handy dandy little chart. You're looking for a fifth that has 6 half steps. Diminished fifth, very good. All right. Let me give you another example.
Oh, yeah, we got here that trouble.
Back. Okay. So, first step, what do we gotta do? Count the lines and spaces, okay? Do that. I'll give everybody a second to do it, and I'll ask you what you got. What do we got? Some kind of sixth. Yep. Then find those 2 notes on the keyboard. What's my first note? E natural, very good. What is my second note? C sharp. Always watch out for key signatures when you do this. Because you can be going along in your music and think you're doing fine and then go, oh crud, that was sharp all along. I got it wrong. So make sure you're looking at your key signature all the time. So between E to C sharp, now you're counting half steps using your keyboard. And then tell me what kind of interval you come up with. What kind of sixth do we have? Major, very good. Let's do one more together and then I'll get you your bell word for the week. Okay. Figure out the number part of the interval. What do we have? Second, good. 1, 2. Okay, so got some kind of second. Go to your keyboard. What's my lowest note? F. What's my upper note? G. Count half steps. How many half steps is that away? 2, very good. What kind of second is 2 half steps away? Major second, very good. Okay, so that's how that works. Any questions? I know it's kind of like a step-by-step. Eventually you look at these and you just kind of know because you've done it long enough, but this is how we start to get to the right answer. Okay? If there are no questions, we'll wrap that part up. And then you have your choice between the basic bell work or the advanced bell work. I'm just going to stop this, maybe.